Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
House Speaker Tina Kotek began her career service as a policy advocate for the Oregon Food Bank. And in 2006, she was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives, representing North and Northeast Portland. Since 2013, Tina has served as the Speaker of the House. Multifamily owners are likely aware of her plan to address the affordable housing issue the state's facing with the proposed elimination of no-cause notices and removing the statewide ban on rent control. So please join me in welcoming House Speaker Tina Kotek.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't have a poem. Mr. Mitchell, that's a hard act to follow. Thanks so much. I think we should have him down to Salem. I sit through a lot of forecasts, and they're not nearly as interesting, let me tell you. So, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share a few thoughts. I'm glad you were able to reschedule after snowpocalypse, so thank you. And reschedule actually pretty quickly because we start session next week, so I'm glad I'm able to be here. You know, the snow and the ice and the cold were, really difficult, I think, on all of us. For many of us here, it was mostly really an inconvenience. You were able to work from home or had your kids at home, but for a lot of folks, they weren't able to work, and that lost income is going to make it hard for them to pay rent and put food on the table in the coming month. And for those without housing, it was pretty bad out there, and unfortunately and tragically, it was deadly for some. So I think you can tell from my bio that I'm an advocate. I'm not just an elected representative. My professional perspective and just personal inclinations is to try to solve problems when I see them. And I'm also a pragmatic policymaker. I have to be very practical in my day job. And it's really important for me to hear from all perspectives because I really think to solve problems, particularly really large, complex ones, we all have to work together. When I worked at Oregon Food Bank in the early 2000s, my job was to go educate the public and legislators about how we would eliminate hunger in our state. And the one thing that I saw that would really make a difference in people's lives, that one thing that was really going to make sure they made it was housing, affordable housing. To really put someone on the path to long-term self-sufficiency, you needed to have good housing. And, I remember, talking to folks when they would get on the Section 8 list and would actually get a voucher. It was like, the golden ticket in Willy Wonka. It was going to change their whole life. So even back then in the early 2000s, there was an affordable housing issue. There was tension between landlords and tenants on how the law worked for them. So this isn't really new, and one could argue in hindsight we should have fixed it back then, more than a decade ago, but we didn't, and we're here now, and it's a set of problems we can no longer ignore, whether locally or at the state level. Making progress on our housing crisis here in the state is a unique challenge for a state lawmaker like me because we as a society have largely relegated housing to the private market, to private property discussions. Each of you, if you're a landlord or an owner or an investor, have taken a private risk. And you've either reaped the benefits or suffered the consequences, and very likely both. And I believe our current laws respect the rights of landlords, as well as reflect the understanding that there's a public interest in what happens in your properties. Hence, we have a long-standing tradition of landlord-tenant statutes. They're intended to balance the rights and responsibilities of both parties to a lease. Because housing is not solely a private good. It's a quasi-public good that impacts everything around us, from education to healthcare, to public safety, to employment, frankly, to the overall economic vitality of our state. Because access to safe, affordable housing is a basic human need, government has an important role to play as a watchdog and a mediator, especially when the market becomes too unpredictable. I think we can all agree that Oregon is facing a very serious shortage of affordable housing in many communities across our state. A shortage, I would argue, and truly believe, is not of any group's making or intent, but one that is nonetheless harming real people's lives every day. And the housing crisis, and our economic forecasters will tell us this, is also harming Oregon businesses and our state's economic competitiveness. So as many of you know, I've joined with some of my colleagues in Salem to put forward several policy ideas that we think will help address this crisis. And contrary to what you may have read in the newspapers or on emails, I recognize that solving the crisis needs multiple strategies. It boils down to 3 key strategies. 1, we have to preserve the affordable housing stock we have. 2, we need to build more affordable and market rate housing. And we need to protect tenants who are experiencing immediate hardships. I'm committed to, and I know many of my colleagues are, addressing both the short-term and long-term trade-offs of any policy changes. I also know that we are all in this together, and vilifying any side of this debate is just really not helpful. I'm known as someone who just tells it like it is. It saves everyone time and aggravation, I think. I know many of you have questions or concerns or are just flat out opposed to the things you're hearing that are being proposed in Salem, and I get that. That's really very normal in the process for those of you who aren't in Salem a lot. It's part of our process. I'm very open to pushback, as I'm sure my colleagues are as well. Lawmaking is the art of the possible, and that means working with people who have opposing viewpoints, because if we're going to have the best solution, we need to hear all sides. And trust me, since I've been working on housing now for the last couple years, I've had probably an equal amount of angry emails from both tenants and housing advocates and landlords. So I think that when you're trying to address a very complex topic, it requires compromise and shared risk. And as we all know, no one is completely happy when you try to strike a compromise. I have been proactively meeting with developers and landlords and other groups to learn more. And I fully admit that I don't know all the ins and outs of your business, so I'm really glad to be here today. I want to hear your feedback on the proposals that I'm going to lay out today, and I encourage you to stay engaged as we continue the debate during the legislative session. We start next Wednesday. Just saying no or trying to lock down and have no suggestions is just not going to help us solve this problem. I'd like to solve this crisis with you. I think Oregon is depending on us to be able to work together on these very serious issues. So I want to talk a little bit about the problem and what the state's been doing, and then talk about the specific policy proposals that are up for us in the session that start next week. So it's good to have Mr. Mitchell's presentation, so because some of it's in here. First, we have a problem. We didn't build enough in the Great Recession, and a lot of people want to live here. That's the basic problem that we're really encountering right now. Based on 2016 data, our state economist estimates that Oregon would have needed to triple our production of units to keep pace with new demand. Therefore, if demand stays the same in 2017, which with population growth probably will, we would need to build over 57,000 units to keep just even with the demand of new residents, and an additional 54,000 units to make up for the deficit of the last 10 years. In total, we would need to build over 111,000 new units statewide in 2017. If we were to accomplish that, that would be 6 times the number of units that were built last year. These numbers don't even get into the need for affordable housing, which has been estimated by the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department as 150,000 unit shortage for families who earn 50% of average median income or below. 150,000 units short on affordable housing. It may take more than a decade for new units to filter down and become affordable for low-income Oregonians. And a decade is too long for people who are living in crisis today. So this is truly a statewide crisis, and it's impacting each community in particular ways. Here in Portland alone, housing has been underbuilt by 23,000 units over the past decade. The city recently released a report that revealed that there are no neighborhoods anywhere in this city where the average African American household, Native American household, Latino household, or single parent household can afford to rent. 0 neighborhoods. And the possibility of home ownership is even harder and bleaker. In Bend, the vacancy rate is around 1% for the 4th year in a row. And we saw the population shifts in Bend. For renters, that means an eviction or a major rent increase can turn their world absolutely upside down. And we know it's not much different here in the metro area. A housing crisis of this magnitude is not just bad for renters, because the ripple effects of this crisis also negatively impact Oregon businesses. It's harder to recruit and retain middle-wage workers if they're forced to live in the outer edges of the region. Rising rates of homelessness create public safety and public health concerns, which are not only bad for people, but they're just really bad for business as well. So it's kind of a tough problem. It's going to take a while to figure it out and get out of it. So what's the state been up to? Over the last 2 years, we've really tried at the state level to step up and help out. We frankly just can't sit back and ask local government to try to solve this by themselves. So like in any crisis, the legislature prioritized additional funding. We allocated $10 million more for a total of $30 million to the Emergency Housing Assistance and State Homeless Assistance Programs. They're known as EHA and SHAP, with the goal of preventing homelessness and stabilizing folks who have no housing. We authorized $2.5 million in bonding for the preservation of existing affordable housing. We allocated $2.7 million for foreclosure counseling, and yes, that is still a problem out there. And we restarted the General Assistance Program to help people who can't work and need to get on federal disability assistance. This helps many individuals living on the street. So in addition to those additional funding investments that we made, we worked on the policy side. We ended the statewide ban on inclusionary zoning and construction excise taxes. Just last month, it was a couple weeks ago, the Portland City Council unanimously passed the local inclusionary zoning program here. The Hood River County Board of Commissioners, and Hood River has a serious housing problem as well, they began drafting new construction excise tax legislation that they're going to devote to funding affordable housing. And on the tenant landlord side, back in the 2016 session, we also approved increasing the notice time to 90 days for anyone anticipating a rent increase. So people had more time to plan. And then finally, to help with construction, the state also created an innovative new program, the Local Innovation and Fast Track Program. Many of you know it as LIFT. LIFT is an additional affordable housing construction program. We're now using state bonding to help finance the construction of affordable housing for low-income households, especially families. In 2015, the legislature approved $40 million in public bonding to invest in LIFT and to get more units built. And last week, the state's Housing Stability Council approved funding for 12 projects that will provide 965 Oregon families and communities across the state a place to call home. So this is definitely progress, but given the depth of the problem, we have to do more. So what's on the horizon for the session that starts next week? The same three things that I talked about that we need to do. We need to build more housing, preserve the affordable housing that we have, and we need to protect tenants in a volatile, low vacancy market. So first, on preserving the affordable housing we have and building more. This is going to be tough because it takes money. And if you've been reading the paper at all in the last week, you know that we have a $1.8 billion shortfall at the state budget between what we currently do and what the forecasted revenue that we might be receiving. And so we're working on that. It's a challenge, but it's going to be very difficult, I think, to fund anything new without revenue. But if we can figure it out, and if we do have additional revenue, and that's a big if, I will be asking for another $100 million in, I would hope, actually, general fund for the LIFT program to move more money into affordable housing construction, $100 million more for preservation, so we can keep holding on to what we have, and $50 million more for emergency housing and shelter assistance so we can help people who are in crisis and at the risk of being homeless or are currently unhoused. I'm also open to talking about new tax incentives because I think that often comes up in ways to stimulate the private sector. But I want to remind people they also cost money. And so it seems, in my mind, more prudent to go directly to the existing programs we have to spend money for additional investment. To help on the construction side of the equation, it's not just about money. I also firmly believe that we need to address barriers to development at the local level to allow developers to do their job as cost effectively and as quickly as possible. So let me give you one example. I recently heard from a developer who was working on a project that was zoned for 10 units with the ability to density bonus up to 14 units. The developer's plan was to build 10 market rate units and 4 affordable units. But to take advantage of a density bonus, the city doesn't allow any adjustments. So because of that, the developer is now going to build 12 market rate townhouses instead of the 14, and none of them are going to be reserved for affordable rents. In this crisis, that kind of stuff has to stop. So we need to work on that. On the preservation of affordable housing, we have to really preserve what we have. That's absolutely critical. We don't want to go backwards in supply, given everything I've just said. And we know that contracts for many publicly supported affordable housing properties are about to expire. There are 325 HUD properties in Oregon. Of these, 4,000 units in 121 properties have Section 8 site-based assistance expiring over the next 7 years. So we're at risk of losing those units unless we do something. There are an additional 72 HUD-administered properties with 2,200 rental units at risk of deterioration due to age and an inability to take on debt to recapitalize and renovate. And for those of you who own property, you know, if you don't keep up, they're uninhabitable. So we have risk there. Since 2006, the state has invested over $122 million to help preserve 215 properties, which represents a total of nearly 10,000 units. So we have recognized the issue. We struggle to find the dollars every session to deal with it, but we are trying to help out. It's an ongoing priority, and we're going to continue to work on that. In the area of housing preservation, I have introduced legislation, House Bill 2002, if you haven't seen that yet, to help preserve more housing. It's going to do 3 things. Expand the definition of publicly supported housing to include housing supported by federal, state, or local benefits or tax incentives. Require 2 years' notice of intent to sell such a property, and require owners to provide the state and local government with an opportunity to purchase publicly supported housing to ensure that as much publicly supported housing as possible remains affordable, as opposed to getting sold to a third-party owner who may flip the property to market rate. So while we must preserve more units and build more units in order to address the root cause of this crisis, I hope you understand from what I've just been saying that the supply side is not enough. That alone will not solve our problem. It's going to take over a decade for new units to filter down, and even if we were able to build enough affordable units at just half the rate of market rate units, it would take an estimated 15 years to meet housing demand for Oregonians below 50% of AMI. I'm going to work really hard to work on the construction side of this equation. But we also need to discuss the stronger protections for tenants right now in order to provide some immediate relief and stability for the 40% of Oregonians who rent. So let's talk about probably the issues that some of you are probably most interested in, which is tenant protections in the upcoming session. We need to establish a just cause eviction standard, and we need to allow local governments to establish rent stabilization policies. I think we need to change the law on no-cause terminations. As in all parts of our lives, there are good actors and bad actors, and I believe, in my personal experience included, that most landlords are very proud of what they do and have great relationships with their tenants. We as legislators often legislate to deal with excesses or inequities, and that's the situation we face now. We have a lot of owners, unfortunately, taking advantage of the market in a way that is forcing us as lawmakers to have to do something. I'm going to refer you to, there are a lot of bills that were introduced on the just cause discussion, I'm going to refer you to House Bill 2004. There are 15 legislators who have sponsored that bill, so I think it's a good place to start. The proposed law in House Bill 2004 would replace no cause notices with just cause notices so that a landlord has to give a legitimate reason to evict a tenant. All of the current tenant-based fault notices would remain unchanged, and a new category of legitimate landlord-based no-fault causes would be added to the statutes. The new law would protect tenants from unfair displacement without a reason and help tenants with moving expenses if evicted because of a landlord-based cause. So I think it's only fair that landlords be required to provide a reason for evicting a tenant. To protect the rights of landlords, I support expanding the definition of good cause so those terminations recognize landlord-based reasons for ending a tenancy in addition to the ones that are on the books now. So including things like a landlord or immediate family member wishes to move into a unit, or the property is not fit for occupancy and is scheduled for repairs that will require the tenant to vacate the unit, or a landlord wishes to demolish the units, or a landlord wishes to sell the unit, which is actually already in Oregon law. Unfortunately, the no-cause terminations that are allowed under law right now are ripe for abuse, and particularly in this hot rental market. And we are hearing those stories. My colleagues are hearing those stories. Unfortunately, landlords can use a no-cause termination as a screen for retaliation or discrimination. And many renters avoid asking for repairs, even if their health or safety depends on it right now, because they fear getting a no-cause eviction notice. I know landlords have concerns. I know you have concerns. So let's talk about them and see if we can address them together. This isn't just a Portland problem. We are not looking to undermine the current for-cause terminations in any way. We know that tens of thousands of units in Oregon currently operate successfully with just cause, which is required in tax credit properties and other publicly supported housing. I don't think a change like this is going to clog our court system because regardless of the type of termination, most tenants move out before a case reaches court in the first place. And again, many of you, I'm sure, have specific stories of what hasn't worked for you under our current law. So let's talk about them and figure out how we can address them fairly and systemically. So the other big topic, rent stabilization or rent control. There's a lot of interest in repealing the statewide preemption on rent control so that local jurisdictions can design and pass rent stabilization ordinances designed to meet their community's needs. Present-day rent stabilization policies in other parts of the country protect tenants from huge rent hikes while landlords still get a fair rate of return by setting reasonable and gradual rate increases. No one, including myself, is talking about old school rent control that established hard ceilings on the amount of rent. Most experts are very clear that that's a bad idea, and I agree with that. The rent stabilization we hope local jurisdictions would be allowed to consider would simply regulate the amount and speed at which rents can be increased, helping keep tenants' costs predictable while still allowing increases so landlords can cover their costs. There are several bills that simply lift the preemption. My bill, House Bill 2001, would require some sideboards on local policies, such as requiring a fair rate of return and exempting owner-occupied residential structures with less than 2 units. Certainly things we could talk about. My bill would also implement a 1-year moratorium on rent increases above 5%, with some exceptions, in order to provide some immediate relief to renters. And I think there's some question out there why that's in that bill. Even if we did lift the preemption and rent stabilization policies were implemented here in Portland and other places, it would take a little time. And a moratorium on rent increases would give some immediate predictability to tenants. I want to be really clear. I believe owners need and deserve to make a reasonable profit on their investment. My bill attempts to take into account recent trends in property tax increases and inflation to ensure that landlords would still be able to keep up with operating expenses and make a fair rate of return during a 1-year moratorium. But everything is up for debate. That's how our system works. The Oregon legislature is a committee-driven, public, transparent process. That's my job as speaker, to make sure that happens. So there's going to be ample opportunity to weigh in and be part of the solution. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm here because I believe we have to be uncomfortable, all of us, including me, and be willing to take on these big fights because we want Oregon to be a place where everyone has a chance to succeed. The 2017 session is going to be tough, but it's going to be necessary that we have conversations about the rental market. We also need to keep pushing on affordable housing development and preservation, and we need to continue to do our part to prevent homelessness. Ultimately, this work is about fulfilling a basic human right, the right to safe and stable housing. That's why I believe we need to come together as Oregonians to pass policies that will address this crisis. We must come together in good faith to have the difficult, honest conversations that will lead us to meaningful solutions. The bottom line is that we all need to work together on this and have a state that reflects our values. You have a big role to play in helping us do that and to find workable ways to address these issues. And I just want you to know today, and I hope you spread the word, I want to work with you and look forward to working with you to solve this. And I look forward to your questions. And again, thanks for the opportunity for me to be here today. Appreciate it.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.